The Real Talent Podcast is brought to you by The Agency, Australia's real estate. Welcome to the Real Talent Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Wood from The Agency, and this podcast is where we deep dive into the minds of Australia's top performing agents with one focus: listing strategy. From winning the appraisals to mastering vendor communication, we break down exactly how the best in the business are securing more listings and growing their market share. No fluff, no guesswork, just real insights, real tactics, and real results, straight from the agents who are doing it every day. Let's get started. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode ever of the Real Talent Podcast. Very excited to be launching this. And I thought, first episode, let's go to the big dog straight off. And I'd say one of the godfathers of Australian real estate, James Tostevin. Welcome to the Real Talent Podcast.
Thanks, Woody. Thanks for the opportunity to have a chat.
Absolutely. I think you and I share a lot of similar thoughts in terms of real estate training. I actually worked in your team for, I think it was 9 years in total, which was a phenomenal learning experience. And I think one of the things that you and I share is our love for training, scripts and dialogues, and actually agents improving over time. I'd love to delve into the progression of your career because I think a lot of agents nowadays want that quick fix. They want to get into real estate, be writing $1 million in a year or two. But I think that's sometimes an unrealistic guide for a lot of agents, particularly in, high net worth marketplaces. What was the progression of your career?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it takes, to me, 5 years. I call it a 5-year qualifying period. I think, when people have got databases, when they're really young agents and they've got databases of 85 people, 120 people, 172 people, it just takes a while to get going. But people will often say to me when I do training, it's okay for you to talk about 200 calls a week, but I bring through my whole database in a week, because they're just getting going. So I think it really is important to get into that sort of 500, 750,000 in terms of databases, and that takes a while. So, and I agree with you about the more competitive areas. I think Boroondara, Stonington, Bayside, where Marshall White's predominantly strong. I think Boroondara, of course, I have been in for 40 years. It does take even longer, in my opinion, in a marketplace where there's such talent. There's the competitive nature of agents makes it really challenging to get going. So back in the mid-90s, and it feels like a long time ago, even talking about it, I was sort of basically went from 260 to 560 to 860 to 1.3. And then really I thought, God, how am I ever going to get to 1.5 and how am I ever get to 2 million? So look, I think in terms of peaking individual figures, not team figures. So short team figures, I've got into that $5 to $6 million territory, but individually I've been, no greater than between 4 and 5, which is still good, but it doesn't compare to Alexander Phillips and some of the amazing operators throughout Australia. And I feel Sydney, pound for pound, has a better number of people writing more substantial fees. That's my opinion, but that was a progression, to answer your question.
So if you're a young person in the industry, you move into a team, obviously there's a balance of actually working with that team member or team leader that you're working with, but also building your database. From a gross commission perspective, what do you think they should be aiming for over that 5-year period?
If they're within a team structure, you mean? I think if they can be really writing in that sort of 200 to 300, ideally, obviously if they can build beyond that, that's fantastic. But if we're talking a quite young, inexperienced agent, I think if they can, and even in the first year, as you and I both know, that would be challenging in my market to get to 200. But I agree, it's difficult to do a broad, generalisation about where people should be. But if anyone got into the 400 plus, they really should begin to think, okay, I'm quite capable of writing those sort of figures and I can start doing my own thing. The danger, as you know, is when you work within a team and the listings come through consistently, is that sense of I'm a bit bulletproof. I'm going to be able to do what that more senior person does that's had 25 years or 30 years or longer. And suddenly they realise it's actually not quite as easy as I realised because the campaigns that they're managing for me give them that constant stream of leads, both buyers and sellers. Now, you also know that one of the challenges coming into companies that have got more substantial profiles is a lot of the senior agents that have been there for a long time, people say, I'm already in touch with such and such from that company. So to find those new leads can be frustrating, but in my opinion, but there's still going to be great opportunities there. But that's what I would say in terms of gross fees. And it would be a gradual thing, but I think if they write 200 in the first year, that would be amazing. I think really if you got into the 100, 150 an hour market, that would be respectable.
Yep.
It's also, as you know, being exposed to the way, pre-campaign, mid-campaign, pre-auction meetings are conducted, the way we educate our clients around price if that's required, which more often than not it is realistically. So exposure to that is critical. So yeah, the gross fees are clearly vital, but the habits that people form in terms of their prospecting, their nurture calls and blocks of time and how they go about that, all those things, all those lessons they learn, it's more important to me than the gross figures. As a director of the company, I'm trying to make sure I fast track their success. Gross fees are one thing, but I want to make sure all those things fall into place. So when they get into real estate sales without being within a team structure, they've got off to a flying start.
Yeah. I heard a great quote one day, actually it was only a couple of weeks ago. It was to do with process versus outcome. And it was amateurs focus on the outcome, professionals focus on the process.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to exactly what you're saying in terms of figures versus the actual activity. So stripping it back to, I think not every agent that enters the industry is fortunate enough to work with a great person or a great team or move into that industry. So let's say you enter the industry, you're not in a great team. Let's say you're just a standalone agent that's joined a real estate firm. What would you say the top 3 things they can do to fast track their career are?
I think one of the key things when you first get in would be orphan data. I think for me, when someone leaves, and Woody, there's always people that leave a company and say, look, real estate wasn't for me, or they work for that company for a while and don't feel there's opportunities, good opportunities that have been presented to them. They decide to make a move and leave that company. To me, there's been some invaluable leads over the years where our team have definitely picked up and run with that orphan data. They're hard calls to make, as you and I both know. Yep. When you ring, it's a grind, in my opinion, but it's a great way to learn. To me, say, compared to door knocking, when I do training interstate, I get quite a few agents still talk about lots of door knocking. Well, to me, that sense of someone's home, 4 doors, 4 houses in a row, no one's home. Okay, the next person's home, but they're the nanny that's looking after the kids because mum and dad are at work. And you think, to me, in terms of productive use of time, I'd just rather sit there on the phones and just keep charging through phone calls. So I still think as a young age, and as long as you've been given scripts around these are the key things to say. For me, as a quick thing, when you ring, when you cold call, I think it's always important I give full name, full company name, and ask for a minute at a time. Not to speak briefly, because I think how long does briefly mean?
Yep.
Not for 30 seconds, but just for a minute. And then I always use that initiative word, and say, look, I was just showing some initiative. One of the agents that used to work with Marshall White had some contact with you for a period of time. And now that they've left the industry or now they've left our company, I thought I'd show some initiative by making contact with you to see if I can help with any property-related issues, advice, whatever. So I'm just trying to make sure that, and you get all sorts of reactions, I know, in those situations, but I think that's a critical thing, so
Yep.
orphan data.
Yep.
I think the second part is around good disciplines with when you make phone calls, because normally the phone calls for a lot of agents are scattered through the day.
Yep.
So they'll, make calls for an hour, be out for 20 minutes, half an hour, back in for an hour and a half, back out for 20 minutes or an hour, whatever it is, and they're backwards and forwards. So there's very few agents that have that discipline around blocks of time. So I think that's a key thing. It doesn't matter if you ring orphan data, you ring through buyers lists, and I think it's very tough as a young agent unless you've been given managements and properties to run with. So I think that's a key thing.
Yep.
But so that second part of it's around phone contact, when you make it, blocks of time. And the third thing would be just around time management, learning really good disciplines early on, because there's just so many people in our industry that waste so much time.
Yep.
They do things that they really shouldn't do. So there's some of the key things. I'm probably adding a fourth one is training.
Yep.
That some companies are so much better at it than others. But as you know, it's not just a matter of the training that's being offered up by a group, by a company. It's also that independent training. And ARIC's changed a lot over the years, but there are different conferences you can go to again, absorb great lessons and learn. So that's sort of a peripheral but a really important thing. And some companies are better than that than others. A quick comment too on what you just mentioned. I think if someone feels they're in the wrong learning environment or the wrong company, then it's really important not to stay in the wrong area or the wrong company for too long, learn poor lessons and not be exposed to some of the better operators. And and I know that training differs incredibly company to company. The frequency, the quality of it, are they outside speakers, are they internal speakers? So I think a range of those things are important. So to me, if you're with the wrong company, run.
I'm glad you mentioned the training aspect, because I think what a lot of agents do is they get into the industry and they're told to prospect, and they prospect. they create the opportunity, but often they haven't actually refined the skills of a listing presentation. So they create the opportunity, but they just don't have a good enough strike rate because they haven't actually worked on that training. One of my biggest bugbears is when agents say, I don't like doing scripts and dialogues training because it's not an authentic environment. Like, I wouldn't say that in the living room. Well, I think why practice on, real life clients when you could be doing that scripts and dialogues training? I think you're a big proponent of scripts and dialogues and actually learning what to say and how to say it. And I can confidently say that my career wouldn't be where it is, if I hadn't been exposed to those learnings from you. In terms of practicing that, how can agents, I guess, develop that skill in a more quick fashion than
I think
normal?
the key thing, Woody, would be around, certainly I agree with you, and I've often used that phrase, which you would have heard me talk about, where agents do tend to practice on real clients, and they don't expose themselves enough in an office environment to say it's fine to make mistakes. It's okay to you're going to trip yourself up on occasions. We've all had moments where we've said something to a client thinking, gee, I wish I could press rewind. I think 3 people is the minimum. So if you're presenting to a vendor who's an agent within the company you work with, and just someone to critique it. So you just need the 3. The person critiquing it, though, must be someone who's going to be honest with that person and write notes and then identify areas where they could improve. Often it's choice of words, phrases. It's, as you know, when people ask a question, the key thing is looking them at the eye and then responding to them and making sure you do answer that question properly. When I'm with a younger agent, I find a lot of them tend to be quite nervous because they feel like, okay, well, I've done it for 40 years or James has done it for 40 years and I don't want to say the wrong thing. I always talk about looking at that younger agent. So, well, I'm looking at you to respond to that question the vendor's just asked. And then I'll add something to that. If I feel I need to further improve on what they've just said to that vendor, then I'll do that. But it's the only way they're going to learn because, the danger too is if the younger junior agent says, I'm going to take out a senior person, but that senior person then dominates and they do the old I this and I that as opposed to we as a team and then we talk collectively. And even my son Charlie, when he got into real estate, I'd say, these are the things I want you to be proficient at. These are the things I want you to be really knowledgeable about, well scripted on. So we worked on those things. And it didn't, so for the younger person, they often sit there thinking, I'm not contributing.
Yeah.
And the vendor, the prospective vendor, is looking at the young agent saying, that's who I'm going to get. I'm not going to get the director. I'm not going to get the senior one. I'm going to get the young one who basically is a mute. So you've got to be really careful of that.
I remember sitting in my first listing presentation with you when we went there. It was on Montalbot Road in Surrey Hills, and you did exactly that. You asked a question, and you sort of worded me up, so I was ready for it. But you asked a question to the vendors, they then responded, and you then responded and finished the sentence by saying, "Isn't it, Michael?" Yeah. And a lot of agents would just say, "Oh yeah, it is." Yeah. But because we'd actually rehearsed that and we'd, I knew what areas to be focused on, it credentializes that agent within the listing presentation. And I think one of the biggest things that you would have faced in your career from other agents is, well, you won't get James. Mm-hmm. James is not going to be involved. So that's not necessarily the case, but it is incredibly important that that person you take into that listing presentation knows what to say, when to say it, how to say it, and how to deliver the message that you want them to.
And let's face it, there are a lot of young agents, as you know, that have the energy, they get up and go, the motivation, they're prepared to work hours that maybe the older agent might have got. I think most agents, when they get to 50 and certainly 55, 60, they're generally on the slippery slope. Now, I'm 58, I'm actually going the other way, so which is frightening, hopefully, to my competitors. I still love what I do, as you know, but in my view, it's just that there's not that same impetus. There's not that same sense of I'm going to stay back and call back through the people that have been during the campaign and really work hard on every single lead.
Yeah.
A younger agent too, and maybe we'll talk a bit about this, that there are some advantages they obviously offer compared to that more seasoned agent. Yes, a vendor, prospective vendor may look at that person to say, I've got 30 or 40 years experience I'm going to get with that particular individual. But the reality is a lot of the senior agents won't do the private appointments. They won't send contracts and get the family back through with a buyer that's having the second, third look. They won't do those repeat inspections even. Forget a private appointment who's a first inspection.
Yep.
They won't do the repeat inspection. So really the senior agent does tend to still to oversee more than get really involved. As you know, my role at Marshall White is I have been personally involved, continue to be personally involved. I don't want to run the company. I have no interest in doing those sort of things. Yep. So as younger agents, I still think there's things that they can focus on. But I think in that first year or two, just keep being exposed to different people within the group and then take the best of what that person offers.
Yep.
You won't like everything that they do, but say, well, I really like that about that particular agent. And then they'll look at another director within or senior agent within our company and say, I really like their style, their approach, their scripts. I really like that. I'm going to put that into my business. And that's what I did all those years ago with John McGrath. I thought when I listened to John do training, what can I put into my own business that will positively influence what I'm capable of doing?
Yep.
But you can't do everything at once. It would just be overwhelming. So you've got to do things gradually.
So you're a young agent and you're in the living room and I'm going to ask you to take your hat off being an experienced agent in this case. I think one of the challenges you face is that sometimes you actually won't raise an issue with a vendor until it's too late. And what I mean by that is you're up against an experienced agent and you miss the listing, for example. The vendor calls you and says, look, I just didn't feel like you're experienced enough. How can an agent get out in front of that and actually bring that up? What scripts and dialogues can they use? If you're a younger agent and you're up against more experienced agents, what would you be saying?
So I'd say, and you and I have talked about this in the past, where you sort of try to put yourself in the vendor's shoes. And I agree, Michael Sheargold talked for years about, planting bombs,
Yep.
But I talk about reversing that as well, because you've got to anticipate what the more senior agent's going to say if they do find out they're against a far more junior agent.
Yep.
Now, I still think the younger, more junior agent needs to be equipped, in my opinion, or be prepared. And prepared is around, okay, who actually goes to that appraisal? So I'm quite capable, I'd like to think, in a listing environment. But if I go into a property in East Kew, I would still take that more senior agent to give a second opinion like Nikki, or more senior in that area. So if I was a younger agent, Woody, I'd be saying, okay, I really need someone to help me,
Yep.
but I've got to be prepared with my scripts. So the younger agent really needs to articulate to that client that they're the ones doing the hard yards. They're the ones doing the grind. They're the ones doing the callbacks for buyers, the private appointments, the repeat inspections, those things that realistically the senior person's not going to do.
Yep.
If I was, as a young agent, if I was competing against some of the better, like Scott Patterson's a great operator, but Scott does a lot of auctions.
Yep.
So in my opinion, as a younger agent, I'd be saying, but look at when you're open for inspections are probably going to be late afternoon.
Yep.
For me, prime time, late morning, lunchtime, early afternoon, that's when we're going to have your property open for inspection. To me, the younger agent needs to indicate what they're able to dedicate in terms of that time. The effort they're prepared to make is one thing, but it's more time. And that's a precious thing, as we know, because the more senior agents can't offer that. So if I was in script mode, I'd say to that person in that environment, look, I know what a lot of agents talk about, Michael, is having a long time or experience in the industry. Experience is one thing, but initiative and get up and go and energy and making the phone calls is quite another thing. And the average senior agent does not ring back through buyers lists. They don't ring people to develop a sense of whether they're a contender for that property. They're not adept at overcoming objections because they're not making the phone calls. They're not doing things that are going to help make or help produce a much better result than you otherwise would get. So those things are really important. I think for the average prospective vendor, yes, that rapport, the trust, and that sense of confidence in the agent's important. But just because someone's a young agent, I used to say to people, don't judge me around you, like how long I might have been in real estate. I remember an agent years ago in Queensland, when she was young and she was asked how long she'd been in real estate, she'd say, long enough. Feels like forever. And it was a good line because she said I was so young, 18, 19, 20, and people look at me as if I'm potentially adding my most significant asset to this very young agent. But I always hoped as a young agent I'd be judged on my ability, and that's where scripts come into it. Yep. I don't care whether someone's 22 years of age or 25 years of age or they're a bit older and they've got into real estate a year ago. If you keep practicing scripts and you keep making sure you identify things that are going to be important, you're going to be better for that experience. The other key thing, young agent, doesn't whether it's an experienced agent or a young agent, is when you do miss a listing, get a listing, keep asking the questions because that will also teach you what can I do differently next time. I've got to be prepared for that question.
Yep.
But I think, as you say, getting out in front of it, because if you wait for the vendor to make their own judgment, the risk is they will make a judgment and they'll think you're too young. So
I think a lot of agents, like I spoke to an agent probably about a month ago and they said, I've got no interest in finding out about my competitors. Yeah. I don't really care who I'm up against. And I thought, gee, what a lazy thing to do because you're probably, I think in a lot of the times you're actually afraid of finding out who you're up against, but you can really use that as an advantage. From a younger agent's perspective, I agree with you. I think those things that you can actually, you can out-service that vendor. Out-service the other agent rather, so the more experienced agent. Because I think a lot of the times, and you're probably an exception to the rule, but a lot of experienced agents can get complacent, particularly if they know someone. Like I think one of the things that you always taught me was it doesn't matter if it's your best mate or someone you've just met, treat them the same in terms of chasing a listing. So just moving into that from chasing listings and I guess your process, what does your pre-listing process look like and what does your post-listing process look like?
So pre-listing, certainly when I'm one of those people that doesn't turn it into the old Spanish Inquisition where the person thinks, gee, all I wanted was an appraisal.
Yep.
And I'm on the phone for 15, 20 minutes while this person asks me question after question after question. Certainly in that pre-list scenario, I want to establish what prompted them to ring me. Was it my profile in the area? Was it someone that had recommended me? So that can provide that immediate sense of, certainly if it's been a recommendation, obviously that's something that we all know is so important. But beyond that, I want to know a little bit about the property, but I also ask price or about price a bit differently, Woody, to other agents. So if I say to a client, look, Michael, what normally happens is agents often come out to do an appraisal and they then say, let me do some research. Look, now that I've seen your home, in other words, I'll do the homework then because I've seen the property. But what I'd like to do is come well prepared to our meeting tomorrow or later in the week, whenever it happens to be, to make sure I am well prepared. I don't mind if the range is 100 or 200 or 300 or 400. Just roughly, where did you think wherever they happen to live, Tower Road, what did you think the value of Tower Road is? Just approximately, very roughly, Now, there are people that say, James, that's why I'm getting you out to come and have a chat. Yep. But equally, there's people, I spoke to a woman the other day and she said, well, James, look, I was thinking 2728. This is what my COV is. And she started going through this list. Another agent indicated early threes. I didn't think that was realistic. She was so informative. She really helped me. Now, the other little line I use in that situation, if they say, I'm not really sure, and that's why I am getting you to come and have a chat to me. So I understand that, Michael, absolutely. But forgetting what you thought, because you're saying you're not sure what your property is worth, what are you hoping it's worth? Mm-hmm. So that line is also, it's amazing what that prompts. Well, I'm not sure, James, if it's realistic, but this is what I was hoping to get. Okay, so with the client the other day, I said, what I'd like to do then is I'll bring sales between sort of that mid-twos and probably mid-threes, just a bit under and a bit over what's likely to be achieved, and then that will make our meeting more productive. So I appreciate you being up front, etc. I then send a text, just a quick confirming text, look forward to meeting you, and obviously confirm that.
Yep.
And then the pre-listing kit that we send out. And our pre-listing kits are great. They're really like a submission. They obviously don't have commission in there. Obviously, they don't have advertising in there. I might include a calendar around timing if they're thinking about a couple of dates and they've already said, James, I'm thinking of auctioning on August 16th or 23rd. Yep. Bang, I can put the calendars in. But other than that, that does get to them within an hour or two. So ideally, personally delivered, could be a courier, but a lot of my team will deliver those pre-listing kits.
Yeah, and in terms of, you touched on the calendar. I know that you're a big proponent of actually using that calendar throughout the structure of the listing presentation. So let's move into that listing presentation. Pretty much would the majority of your listing presentation or the structure of the agenda of that be the same most times? And how would you place when you speak about commission, to when you speak about timing of sale, to when you speak about method of sale, to when you speak about marketing? How is that structured for you?
Well, as you and your experience working with me, I do talk effectively to that calendar. So I think timing's such an easy thing to start on because that often will lead to method of sale. As I just said a moment ago, they might say, James, I picked September 6th, right? That's the date that suits me. It's before the grand final, it's before the school holidays, which start 2 weeks later. Think, okay, well, in their mind, they're clear on auction. I don't have to go near method of sale. So I think when I sit down with a client, you know what I tend to do in terms of building rapport, and I don't mean a minute or two. I don't mean talking about the weather and then moving on to let's talk real estate. So I do spend as much time learning as much as I can about the client. I mean, about their children, and I know what people are like. They always love to boast about, well, most people like to say how intelligent their children are, how well they're doing, etc. So kids, how long they've lived there, what they've enjoyed most about the property, whether if they've renovated, architect, builder, what that experience is like, if they're bought and sold. Obviously, I'll move to that, which is a bit more property related. I do take a real interest in what they've done professionally, their kids, what the kids are doing, and where the kids are living. So if they're studying, if they've moved out, if they're renting, There's so many different things, as you know, you can talk about. So I don't just spend 2 minutes. I don't spend even 5 minutes. But once I move into listing mode, I'm very much structured. And yes, to answer your question, it is much the same structure. I'm not one of those people, and you know there's some people at our company that have an agenda, so a typed agenda. That goes in their pre-listing kit. I would never do that.
Yep.
So for me, it needs to be more relaxed than that. You are building rapport. Obviously, if they like me, the company, naturally, their brand, their profile is all important. But if they don't like me and feel comfortable with me, the presentation is so much harder. So I don't ever follow strict guidelines. I don't ever follow a strict list of things. And so just let me do this in order, Michael. I'm focusing on some important things. And you've just jumped 2 steps ahead.
Yeah.
I'm never going to do that. I do talk around timing, and then I'm careful, Woody, because the danger is if I start saying August, September's the time to go, I wouldn't go October, November because it's much busier. Well, I'm not going to be ready till October.
Yeah.
So simple questions, but when were you thinking of selling? How soon were you planning to go into the market? So the client the other day that said to me, look, I was thinking early next year. I said, is there any reason you wouldn't go in October, November? Oh, no particular reason, but I don't think I can get my house ready in time. But what if we helped you with that process? What if we not only recommended various trades to you, we played a role in quickening that process? And she said, well, actually, that could work. I'm away in September, but I just didn't think it was realistic.
Yep.
Now, of course, if I can make it a bit earlier, why wouldn't I make it a bit earlier? So I do leave certainly the value, and I've discussed it on the phone before getting there, and commission, I leave that till very, very late. The very last thing I'm ever going to talk about is fees.
Yep.
So that's the very last thing.
I agree. I love in terms of a lot of agents they'll say, well, I speak about value first. And I think, well, if that vendor doesn't agree with your thoughts on value, what you say for the rest of the presentation may as well be thrown out the window.
I know, because
that's all they're thinking about.
You're on the back foot. You know, I isolated, I say, look, other than the obvious things, being the value of your property, Michael, and the costs associated with selling, what's important to you with your choice of agent? Is there a criteria you've got in mind, or 1 or 2, 3 things driving the decision? And they might have been upfront. They said, look, James, I'm going to be upfront with you. I'm speaking to 3 agents, speaking to 4 agents. We had one guy recently spoke to 7. I thought, my God, what a loser. Imagine speaking to 7 agents. Like, imagine having the time to speak to 7 agents. Like, insane. Most people we know, well, certainly on average in our markets, 3. That's pretty common. If I've had contact with them over a number of years, 5 years, 8 years, 15 years longer, they still might compare me. They might do that, but I want to make sure in a perfect world, I'm in first. I don't have the view, the attitude, I'll be in last. I'm going to position myself in last. To me, they're most attentive in that first appraisal where they're listening to everything you're talking about. By the 3rd or 4th agent, to me, it's sort of heard that, an agent's already covered that,
Yep.
So I don't know. I like making the running. I really do.
I think that is one of my it is my favorite question you ask at a listing presentation. Apart from the obvious things, costs, timing, marketing, what's important to you? Because what I've noticed that you do in the past, and I think any agent can do this, and I structure it, I call it sell what you've got, right? So a lot of vendors will respond to that by saying, well, I'm not sure. And you can then say, well, look, a lot of vendors look for these things, and then you just point out 6 of your strengths or 5 of your strengths. And I think younger agents can do it really well as well.
Yep.
And they can say things like, a lot of vendors want an agent who's got a lot of time. So an agent who's available 7 days a week to do a private appointment at 7:30 at night. That's what vendors look for. Whereas when you're a more experienced agent, you could say, a lot of vendors want an agent with a great track record who's been doing it 10 to 12 years. Yeah. Is that really something you see as a huge positive?
It's critical. I think I agree with you. I mean, that's one question I ask in that environment in terms of especially face-to-face before I go and see them. So if I was seeing someone at 4:00 next Monday, as you know, that's when I would say to that person, I appreciate we'll discuss timing, presentation, costs involved with selling, method of sale. But when I do see you at 4:00 on Monday, are you happy for me and for Marshall White to represent you with the sale?
Yeah.
So that, as you know, is my qualifying question. Now, they might say, James, look, I was thinking of speaking to 1 or 2 other agents, but you've been in touch now for a number of years, and I thought, look, I'll come back to you first because you've been in contact for so long. I'll try and block the other agents. Could we at least have a discussion? Or first I'll say, Michael, have you made contact with the other agents yet? No, I haven't yet. Well, could we at least have a discussion first on Monday? If you're happy, we'll see where their discussion leads us. I say that deliberately, so it's a very careful wording, not you're going to appoint me there and then. We'll see where the discussion leads us. If you're not happy for some reason, then by all means, there may well be an opportunity in your mind to speak to another agent or two, but let's have the chat first.
Yep.
I'm trying to block the other agents. With the criteria question, I still get people that say to me, commission. I'm thinking, I just said to you, other than the value and the cost associated with selling, and they've said to me commission. So I think he's a very commission-conscious person. So that can happen. But I agree with you. The vital thing is when people say, I'm not sure, because I haven't sold a property for a long time. I've been here 21 years. So that's when I definitely direct them, encourage them to look for things that I know are strengths of not only me, but also the company that I'm a part of.
We'll get to post-listing in a second. Just one more thing, going back to preparation with those calendars. I think a lot of the times agents can fall into the trap of speaking to a vendor on the phone. They organise the appointment for 1 week's time, and that vendor said to them, look, I'm thinking September. They get to the listing presentation. They've got a calendar for September 9th or whatever the date may be. And then the vendor said, actually, no, we've changed our mind. We're thinking October. That agent isn't actually well prepared with the relevant calendars and timing options for that vendor. Your pre-listing kit was, when I worked with you, very extensive, and you were always well prepared. How important is that?
It's critical because I think, we work with a guy, Mark Sutherland, was fantastic at it. So Sutherland not only took in, as we all do as agents, we take in, okay, what's the land size, heritage, last sale price and date, what are the recent sales? If I'm going to something in East Hawthorn, what's happening in East Hawthorn? Maybe what's happening in Campbell over the Burke Road border, what's happening in Hawthorn. I might take in a cross section, but Southo would also be really good at bringing in properties that were competing against.
Yep.
So that was smart to me. And I think a lot of agents don't do that, especially if you've asked a question, Woody, around price. You've got a feeling for what they're thinking and anticipating for their property. And if I've got a vendor who's thinking 27, 28, let's bring in what they're potentially what's in the market at that particular time on offer in that 2.5 to 3. Maybe you tighten the range a little bit, but I think that's a smart thing to do.
Yep.
I think an agent that goes in without those things is just making it so much harder. Market share. Now, if you've got great market presence and again, price bracket, I might say, okay, I'll take in all agents, market share. Of course, as you identified before, if I know I'm against Gillis Craig and Tim Heaviside, then I need to take in market share with those 3 companies, not Cane Burden, not Artiga, not Fletcher's, because the company's not considering those companies. So that's important to be well prepared with that market share. And then potentially, as you say, calendars, advertising schedules. But it depends on their situation. Like with a client I saw yesterday, which backs up what you were saying, I took in the 23rd, 30th of August, 6th, 13th of September.
Yep.
So I deliberately took in 4, so I was well prepared. Now, she's favouring the 6th, so guess what? Well, in fact, she's pretty much chosen the 6th, so we'll let the 6th with her.
Yep.
So she was not prepared to make a decision on marketing on the spot, but again, that information was left with her. So where possible, and you would remember working as a team, for me, I'd try to get the commitment. I don't want a client to say, I'm going to think about it, because that's the easy fallback.
Yep.
Even if they said with marketing, I'd always say, we normally put to be advised, to be confirmed.
Yep.
It's very rare. If I don't think the vendor's in that headspace, I don't want them thinking, that's another reason to delay making the decision.
Yep.
So I won't, I'll think about marketing. I don't want them delaying putting a signature on an authority thinking, we've got to think about marketing.
Yep.
So, in real estate, I remember being taught years ago, no can sometimes be not N-O, K-N-O-W. I need to know more.
Yeah.
And sometimes as agents, we don't reflect on that. We don't think about that. So
post-listing, so you haven't signed it up.
Yeah.
Let's say it's one of the rare times that you actually haven't signed it up on the spot and you've got to chase that listing. One of the things that you always taught me that I still think about this day is that there's no ego in terms of actually strategizing with the person that you were presenting with.
Yeah.
And I remember you asking me when we got out of a listing presentation, it was actually the first one, the one on Montalbot Road, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? And I'm thinking, this guy's the number 1 real estate agent in Australia at the time, and he's asking me, who had been in real estate for 2 years, what he could have done differently. And then we went on to strategize how we can chase that listing. What are some of the strategies that agents can implement to follow listings to enhance their chances of winning that listing?
I think the key things, in my opinion, are around timing of those touch points. So what the mistake that most agents make is it in their the raw enthusiasm, especially for the younger agent, Michael, you referred to, they can be overly attentive.
Yep.
So they can think, okay, I'm going to ring and I'm going to do a thank you card. And I think a thank you card, by the way, as you asked what I did, sort of post-presentation or post-appraisal, I think a thank you card would then 24 hours, personalised to their situation, hand-delivered, is really important. There's very few agents that do that. I think we know Matt Steinway is the master of the thank you card in Australia. I think Matt writes probably more in a month than the average agent would in their career. He's so good at it. So I think that's important. But I think timing around, for me, the most personal thing beyond obviously a direct conversation on the phone is a text compared to an email. But you also know that I use what I call the confrontation.
Yep.
So I just drop in to see a prospective client, and on the basis of I'm on the way to another appointment. Now, when they invite me back into their home, it's, have you got 5-10 minutes to come in, James? You certainly need to allow and make sure you've allowed that time. But it's such a critical thing that very few agents do, because to me, the phone is still impersonal. The phone is still easier to defer and to say, look, just give me a little bit more time to ponder and I need another week or two. So to also answer your question, it depends how long they're going to take to make the decision.
Yep.
If they're taking a fortnight, then just imagine ringing that person every day, even every second day. You've got to be careful. They think this is not only information overload, I'm feeling harassed.
Yep.
And the fine line we know in our industry is the person's, sure, they want you to know you're enthusiastic and being attentive and you're keen to represent them. There's a commitment, almost hunger there to do so, but there's not a desperation to do it. And that's what a lot of young agents get into. They slip into the desperation mode and they go too far. So I think, to me personally, it's a combination of things, from the nice little personal touch of a thank you card to, yes, there might be text messages and further information. And I'll often say to a client, if I think of anything else that might be relevant to your decision, I'll make sure that I have a chat to you about that, or I'll make sure I provide that information to you. Because I might have been able to glean or pick up some information in that presentation thinking, okay, well, I do like to think I'm well prepared, but gee, they've never talked about that, or they've suddenly brought in another agent. Okay, I need to respond to that. The other thing, which I know I'm throwing different things or discussing different things with you, I think it's good to ask that question. Have you had a good real estate experience in the past, or a not so good real estate experience in the past? Do you know anyone in the industry, even if they're not in this core area or the area in which you live? It's amazing what can come from that. People say, oh, James, I know an agent, but he's sort of a friend of mine, but he works in Eltham. Who do you happen to know? Oh, I know a guy, Rocco. I know Rocco from Morrison Clement. I think, you ripper, right? I'm going to use that to my advantage. I remember going for a listing years ago, and there was a guy, David McFarlane, the late David McFarlane, and he worked in the Eltham area, and they said they were really, really close friends of David. I thought I was on the back foot. Yep. Genuinely thought I was coming second. And I rang David and said, I need some help, right? And David helped me get the listing. Yep. So I'm never proud about that. Like, I'm not I beat my chest and saying, how good am I? Yep. But also the key thing, without getting off your question, when you do ask why you got a listing or why you missed a listing, it's still how you ask it. So when the authority's been signed and I say to Michael, you were considering 3 agents, what tipped the scales in our favour, what ultimately led you to appoint me and to appoint Marshall White, I learn from those things too. I use those things next time. And equally, when I miss a listing, I say, you're not going to offend me. Yep. You're not going to upset me. I've got a thick skin. But I use those things for next time. So there's all those things that are important.
I think that is such a good point, because a lot of the time agents will just say, why did you go with the other agent? And it's the same thing that a vendor says every time. It was a toss of the coin. It was so close. I couldn't split you. Well, you could. There was something that made you go with that other agent. I think the way you ask that question is critical. I want to change tact a little bit and just talk about, focusing on an area versus focusing on a larger municipality, because I think a lot of agents nowadays are taught, focus on one suburb, focus on 2 suburbs, and that's it. That's going to be the way to fast track your career. You're a bit different because you've worked across Burundara and I guess parts of Sonington for your 30-year career.
40 year.
40 year career.
Just ticked over 40.
Sorry, mate, selling you short. And I think if you looked on REA, you might not be number 1 in any particular suburb, but if you looked across 10, you might be top 3 in 10 of them.
Yeah.
If you were starting again, would you run a similar style, or would you focus on the 1 or 2 areas?
I think if you look at people like Zadie Reynolds, who I understand she's going to be one of the next people you speak with. I'm an enormous fan of Zales, and she has done exceptionally well focusing on Glen Iris Ashburton. Yep. Not to say she's not capable, and it's not to say she doesn't handle other areas. It's that she's very proficient in those areas. Andy Nasser, who's at our Brighton office, Andy is very, very focused on a particular part of Brighton, not just Brighton, on a particular part of Brighton. And he has done unbelievably well. So for me, and I mentioned Nikki before, East Q. If I looked at, say, Dwayne and Stuart, who are two of our directors, like me, they cover a lot of different areas. So there's 10 suburbs within Boroondara. And for me, yes, that's what I've done. So I wouldn't actually say to an agent, you can only do it this way or you should only do it this way.
Yeah.
I think, though, as younger agents, I feel they need to work in areas a little bit away from, so in our areas in which we operate, I feel Mont Albert, Surrey Hills, that little bit further out from our office is not as competitive as, say, Hawthorn Q.
Yep.
I used to talk to you about this, you'd remember, and I think that's probably more important because to me, there are some areas where you think you're against the best of the best and it's so much harder. So I think it can work either way. I honestly think that, whether you're an area specialist, I do think there's some merit around farms and territories, etc. But I'm not sure if I've answered quite as succinctly as I'd like because I think there's honestly, you can go either way. But the key thing to learn is probably just pick areas that we're not competing against the very best operators. So.
I look at someone like Ty Menaham, who I used to compete against quite a lot from a listing perspective. And Ty started his career in Chadstone.
Yeah.
Really started to dominate Chadstone. And then now he's sort of working his way into Glen Iris and Ashburton. And I think one of the great things is when you are listing more and selling more, the deal exposure is just enhanced massively. So I think that's very astute advice.
And one other quick thing is, I remember saying, or a prospective vendor said to me recently, James, I see your name, you're very visible. The other agent that I've had some contact with, I really don't see their name on the internet or on the media. They really have got very little exposure.
Yep.
So that's the danger. So for me, I took the view, certainly early in my career, I'd rather operate in lots of different areas within Boroondara.
Yep.
And as you say, I mightn't be number one in any particular suburb, whereas I look at, say, an Andy who, to me, certainly within his core area, he's so far number one. He's so far ahead of anyone else. It's incredible. So it's different. And I think also it depends who you're aligned to, Woody, because I think if you're within a team structure, it depends what that team does. If that team focuses on core areas, we'll continue to run with that. But I think when opportunities present themselves in terms of appraisals, and as long as they're within that core market, there's great opportunities that are going to exist within those 10 suburbs of Boroondara. The other weakness, I think, of a lot of agents, and I agree with you about selling what you've got and working within the framework of what you've got, is when you get leads from, say, Bayside, make sure you so Ben Manolitzis, who's one of our best operators in Albert Park, Middle Park and South Melbourne, let Ben know here's a prospective client. They're not quite ready to buy. They want to sell first, but go and have a chat to them. So, it's such an easy quarter list to me within our group to say, here's a lead, and I don't think agents do that often enough. If it's outside your core area, don't ignore them.
They just let it slip through the cracks and they don't chase it like they could. Listing sources. So what would you rank? Give me your top 3 listing sources.
Oh, for me, open for inspections easily. It's so far and away the best way of, and obviously now, as you know, and for a number of years, I combine my own follow-up within a campaign to getting one of my team to follow a lot of the buyers that have come through.
Yep.
So there is that combination, but there is no doubt that has been number one. So, I could say referrals but then referrals come from so many, so much good work done at an earlier stage. So obviously that would still rate incredibly highly. But if I look at my whole career, I would say open for inspections. I'm not big on social media, so that's not been a big part of my career at any one point. And I think beyond that, even though it's not done, it was been overdone for so many years. If I look at the early part of my career, I certainly did a lot more letter dropping than any other agent did in my core market. So that still created some fantastic leads, which I then used and then followed up over many, many years. But that's not something I do now. I think and I know that someone like Zaylee, pre-sale, post-sale, so when she gets a listing, she's very good at letting her database know, especially within a street or within a couple of streets of that listing, that she's got it. And then when it's sold, what she achieved for it. I think she's one of the better ones in the industry doing that. But I think that's something that agents could be a lot better at. So that would be the order. I think open for inspections have just been invaluable because the average person that says, I'm not ready to do anything yet, I'm just doing some homework, I live locally, I'm probably not ready for 3-4 years or 5 years plus, but they're the people I've made so much money from. Because the average agent doesn't bother to follow them up. They don't, get in the door. I sold a property in Cotham Road Q. I've been in touch with John for 31 years. And I was talking to one of our young agents recently about it, and they said, how often did you appraise it in 31 years? I said, I never appraised it in 31 years, but I just kept in touch. He'd never let me in the door. Now, I still competed against one other agent, but who he'd bought a property from, he was scaling down. But when I asked him why I got the listing, he said, well, pretty obvious. You kept in touch for 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's just that building rapport and that sort of thing. So it's probably, look, the leads have come from different sources, but I'd say opens clearly have been number one.
One of the great questions that often gets asked is you can put two agents next to each other, they can start their careers at the same time, yet 10 years later, one can be vastly different to the other. What do you think pushes good agents?
Yeah, no, I think, Eric, we always hear about, you've got to know your why. I feel it's a little bit cliched, but I think for me, look, different things motivate us. But I think I agree with you. There are agents who think, why has that person gone ahead at such a rapid rate? I mean, Andy, who I've talked about a couple of times today, he's been in real estate for 6 years, and you look at the success he's achieving. Now, to me, it should shine a light on all the things you're capable of doing as an agent. And it should almost embarrass some agents to think, well, look what I've done in 15, 20 years, and look at this guy, what he's done in 6 years.
Yep.
And I think for him, he talks about brand, and without getting off your question, I think, he worked with a company where they, I think, sold in the preceding year 6 houses, 215 apartments. And he said, well, this is going to be tough to get into, better areas. So I think for me, coming back to your question, I think a lot of it's around your attitude. So I had a really happy upbringing, but we didn't have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was a driver. I wanted choice and freedom in my life. And I wanted to say, okay, from the car I drove to the house I lived in, to the beach house I owned, to turning left on an aeroplane, not right, and the hotels I stayed in when I went overseas, etc. I wanted freedom around those things, Woody. So I think for me, that's been a massive driver. I like being successful. I like being recognised in the industry as being, one of many, but one of the better operators around. I like, for me, even though people say, leaving a legacy is a bit corny and cliched, I want people to say, I learned a lot from that guy. I went to a training session and I embraced a lot of the things he talked about. So that's, been an important thing for me. But as a younger agent, there's also a lot that just cut corners. They're lazy. I can't stand it. It drives me nuts. They just don't put in the time.
Yep.
And we all know that, the hours and the time that you put in when no one's looking is such a key, to me, it's a key thing. We've got 901 square metres in our office. There's a lot of places you can hide.
Yep.
You can easily sleep out the door early and you think, God, I'm sleeping home at 5 o'clock. But you're not putting in the time. If you're working 9 to 5, you shouldn't be in real estate. It's not that sort of business. So generally speaking, it's a combination of things, not prepared to do enough training, not prepared to do the prospecting nurture calls. They also don't do it for long enough.
Yep.
So I'll talk about the ripple effect. A lot of agents prospecting, I need some listings. They get a few listings. They think, I now need to manage those listings. So their prospecting nurture calls, they fall away dramatically.
Yep.
So again, that separates the moderately performed agent from the best credentialed agent. So there's a few things there, but a lot of it comes back to energy, motivation. And one of our guys said to me recently, you've got the energy of a 25-year-old. And I bloody have. Yeah, I love it.
You do, mate. I think just to give you a bit of a pump up, mate, if that's what you want your legacy to be, that people have learned from you, I think you can you could retire now. And
No.
I know you're not going to, but you could retire now, and a lot of people will have. Two more questions for you. Yeah. One is based around agents who might have been in the industry for 10 years. They've gotten to 400, 500, but they've never excelled past that. Yeah. Alex Jordan from McGrath in Queensland, he spoke about, I've heard him speak about the fact that he toiled and he was an okay agent for a long time, but one day the switch flipped. And I guess the message there is it's not too late at times to excel.
No, I took 7 or 8 years. I work with a guy, Glenn Cortino, who, Glenn seems to spark this, interesting comment and feedback from people. I think Glenn has had, and now he's in LA, Glenn always had an amazing attitude to an energy level, and I loved his zest for life and his attitude around the people that he knew and the contacts that he had, the way he worked those contacts. He was a master at it. He sold for so many people in the medical profession. So in the days when we'd produce testimonials, he'd have an index with all the medical people he'd sold for and all the people who'd comment positively about what a great experience it was with selling through that guy. So he was so clever at it. So I think, look, there's so many things, as we both know, that can separate, as I said earlier, the moderately performed agent from the successful one. But a lot of it comes back to perseverance. I sold a property in Linwell Road recently for a bit over 2.2. And the mother of the vendor, Kathy, said to me, James, thanks for looking after our family as you always have. And I reflected back on the fact that when I first met Kathy, I missed the first opportunity in Mangara Road, Canterbury, and she said, oh, that was my ex-husband's fault. That wasn't my fault. She laughed about it. And since then, Woody, I've sold a couple of properties for her in Christabel Street in Yarra Grove, and now I've sold for a daughter. There is that tentacle effect in real estate, as we know. So I think generally it's the agents that say, okay, at some point, I don't want to be average. I don't want to be mediocre. I've got reasonable income from real estate, but to me, a big thing is when you have a family, because I think you would know from personal experience with Hunter, when you've got a child or you haven't had your first child yet, to me, the agents that haven't got children have got so much time. I don't realise how much time they've got, but they have got a huge amount of time. When you've got a family, and as you know, I've got 6 children, 6 grandchildren, things change, dramatically, and you think, oh my God, suddenly I've got to fit a lot more in. But the switch can be flicked, I think, when that happens. That's part of it. Or they go to an ARIC, or they go along to see any number of sales trainers, whether it be me or there's heaps of trainers out there, and they think, well, I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mediocre. I want to achieve better things. And suddenly they say, well, okay, I'm going to keep learning. I don't think enough agents go out, seek a mentor, or enough agents within our group. And I always encourage my team to do this. Go and see Ben Menelitzis. Go and see Ben Veith. Go and see Andy Nasser. Go and see David Volpato. Go and see the people that are doing good things and say, what are they doing that I'm not doing? But then be prepared to embrace those ideas. Because a lot of agents do. 5, 6, 7, 8 years, writing reasonable fees, but I'm just comfortable with the point I'm at my career, as opposed to saying, I'm not just comfortable, I've got to challenge myself here. I've got to get outside that comfort zone. I've got to do a few things differently because, you continue to do the same things, you'll continue to earn similar money. So,
lastly, I'm going to ask this to every single guest who comes onto the show. Besides yourself, who is the best real estate agent Australia has produced?
Phil Harris would be, I'd say, for me, the number one agent that's been produced in our country. I can't think of anyone better than Phil. I think it's a combination too. For me, Woody, it's not just about the fees that they write. It's obviously the person they are. I think there's an integrity about Phil. There's just a lot of things I really like about the guys. So Phil, Alexander Phillips, is phenomenal. I think Alexander Phillips has a focus on vendors and just doing the deal. And it's not just about the expensive properties for him. He's really accomplished. And Matt Simon, I think probably those 3 would be the agents that would be up there for me. I don't think there's really anyone within Victoria that would challenge those agents. I don't believe anyone gets within a bull's roar of Alexander Phillips in terms of the fees he writes. But I think pound for pound, Sydney have the best agents. And I agree with you about Alex Jordan. I think to me, he embarrasses agents in Victoria. He goes in and gets 3% plus GST, yet our competitors lead with 0.8 or 1%. And you think, as Chris Hanley once said in Byron Bay, you guys in Victoria have no idea when it comes to fees. so I'd put Alex Jordan up there, but I think for me that would be, if I had to pick 3, that'd be the 3 I'd pick.
I'm going to take Phil as your answer because you said him first. So, Jimmy, thanks so much for coming on, mate. I think anyone listening would have gained an immense amount. And I know that you've done a lot of training over the past. Agents can actually listen to you prospect as well. How can they get in touch?
They just email me or text me and say, look, I'd like to be part of a prospecting session. To me, it's always amusing. I said to a group at Rain and Horn a couple of days ago when I was doing some training for them that it's only $500 for 2 hours. Now that $500 will turn into tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, certainly if you look at their career. But to me, there are people that say, $500, gee, that seems like a bit of money. It's not. But I also said to them, if you choose to do it or not to do it, it's not going to impact on my career. But if you spend the $500, it's sure going to impact on yours. So that $500 is invaluable. And yes, there is that opportunity to come and just sit in. It can be on Zoom. I've had agents from Canada, South Africa, all over Australia, America, different places that have listened to me doing prospecting, and there's some key messages there around tempo, how I build rapport, and why, and it's my number one skill, why I've been so adept at prospecting nurture calls over the years and the profound impact it's had on my career. So the opportunity exists for anyone, not my immediate competitors, but other than that, the opportunity is there for anyone.
I'd love to see where you draw the line and say, no, you can't come. Mate, thanks so much. James, you're from Marshall White. I'm Michael Wood from The Agency, and that's episode 1. The Real Talent Podcast is brought to you by The Agency, Australia's real estate.